Well, the CEO of OpenAI, famous for ChatGPT, is now doubling down on a nuclear fission SPAC. He's been on the board of directors, actually been chairman of this board since 2015, known the founders since roughly around 2013, Y Combinator involved in this. And take a look at this. We're actually going back to SPAC land. Now, I've got some thoughts on this, and we're going to go through it, but first, understand what's going on. The SPAC is going to take OKLO public, which is a company that's developing a small nuclear reactor. And what you could do is you could go to their website and get some pictures of this. These are all just 3D renderings. These don't exist yet. And this stuff makes me very, very nervous. I'm exhausted at looking at renderings and projections. I thought we got past renderings and projections, but no, apparently they're coming back. As the stock market's going up, SPACs are back, baby. So basically, OKLO is, the idea here is that how can we produce a nuclear power plant that could potentially just supply one data center or one massive housing tract of maybe about 15,000 units or one region in a city or a neighborhood or whatever. How can we create a small footprint building with a small reactor in it and basically copy and paste these around the world? And the idea is that maybe we can spend $60 million on a reactor and end up creating a $15 million or 15 megawatt capacity. A 15 megawatt capacity based on a roughly 24 kilowatt hour per day usage on average for an American household covers about 15,000 homes. Now, we did this research ourselves, kind of trying to play with some numbers. The national average for kilowatt usage tends to be around 24 per house per day. And what I thought was really interesting is when we did the math, that actually converted to roughly whatever the megawattage is of the power plant is how many thousands of homes you could power. So if you have a 50 megawatt plant, 50,000 homes. 5 megawatt windmill, 5,000 homes. Kind of incredible. Now, it does appear that the technology is a little bit more expensive, even at their $60 million projection, than, say, wind energy. But wind energy is really good at a couple parts of the day and not always available, which could be a downside, obviously. So you could get like a probably somewhere around a 3 megawatt windmill for around $4 million. So if I wanted to get about 5 of these, I would have about a 15 megawatt capacity for around $20 million. Well, OKLO is expecting to build these nuclear power plants right here for about $60 million a piece and then have a 15 megawatt generating facility. Now, if you could sell this at 20 cents a kilowatt hour, it might be less, but let's say you could sell it at 20 cents, it could be pretty desirable because, that could generate potentially up to $20+ million in a year of electricity, gross electricity revenue. Of course, you have costs that go into nuclear fission, but there's definitely, the concept is definitely sexy. And so this SPAC is looking to be valued at $850 million, looking to raise $500 million in cash. And this small nuclear design setup has not actually been tested yet. They have some permits to really start getting into some of this, but they have not been tested on a super small scale yet like this. Although fission technology is pretty common. You've got fission and fusion. Fission is your common one that is available to nuclear reactors. So the technology is definitely there. Just hasn't been brought down to this sort of smaller scale here. The first reactors are expected to be delivered in Idaho and Ohio. And there are expectations that perhaps there could be very large Inflation Reduction Act tax credits for these sort of reactors. Here's an example of what an OKLO 2 powerhouse would look like. Basically, for those only just listening, it sort of looks like a small, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 square foot building where you have it's just a metal frame and you have a lobby, and then you walk into this smaller room where you have a reactor sitting there that looks like it's about the size of a school bus. And this is somewhat fascinating that in the future we're probably going to have a lot more commercial or a commercial push towards nuclear, which is actually, in my opinion, great. I think it's a phenomenal source of energy. I personally am not sure about investing in a company like this because ultimately what you're doing is you're selling a commodity, right? A unit of electricity is basically a commodity. So you face competition not just from other nuclear power plants, but also from solar, batteries, wind, and then let me just almost hard stop here, permitting. Like, good luck. I mean, I do think, though, where you could prove this model out, where you're probably going to start with this model, is factories in the middle of nowhere. Because people don't want to live around a nuclear power plant. But if you're like, hey, Intel's building a new factory, how about we just put a nuclear power plant next to that and help power it? Great. Fantastic. You know where this could actually be very useful? They should try to sell this sucker in Taiwan. Taiwan, as we talked about yesterday, Taiwan imports 96% of their energy. And if China blockaded Taiwan in some sort of, takeover, battle, whatever, they could basically not kill a single person and just cut electricity off to the island. Like, no actual, combat warfare, like a Russia versus Ukraine. Just cut off Taiwan's electricity supply because they have to physically import 96% of their electricity via, importing natural gas and then operating, either coal-fired power plants or natural gas power plants. And nuclear reactors, them having their own, would be a perfect way for energy sustainability. The problem is, again, you've got a political environment that's super anti-nuclear in Taiwan. Oopsie daisy. So you probably really end up trying to build out a concept like this at factories. Again, Ohio, Idaho, it doesn't really surprise me. Idaho's already got quite a few, energy facilities, nuclear energy facilities and research. It seems like it's a great place for it. But anyway, the fact that SPACs are back, where now you're looking at, here's a company with an idea. I mean, this is really what you have. What you have is a company with an idea, and now they've been around for about 10 years, but it's a company with an idea that has some cool renderings of a power plant and an idea that's very saleable, like, hey, we've got an energy crisis, we've got a problem, let's make a pretty, diagram here of how we can create small power plants, and not yet a provable business model, and then they're going to essentially be worth almost $1 billion. It's kind of mind-blowing to me. Part of this, I think, is because you end up getting people involved like Sam Altman. People put their name on this, and then they're able to SPAC companies. It's kind of like what Chamath did with whether it was Open Door, Virgin Galactic, or otherwise. Now, what's interesting is Sam Altman, actually, a little bit of history on him. He invested $375 million into Helion, and that was a nuclear fusion company back in 2021. Helion is the first fusion company to sign a contract to sell energy to Microsoft, and that is expected to start producing energy by 2028, although that's much more experimental than a fission company. It's kind of incredible, though, and there are real penalties if that fusion company doesn't actually deliver energy, especially since, they haven't quite figured that out yet, which I think is fascinating because it goes to show that in the smaller nuclear power plant space, you're going to have competition between not just solar, wind, and otherwise, but also fusion. That's going to be interesting. Anyway, or Helion is another Hyliion. That's the trucking company. Helion, that'll be quite interesting to see how they can ramp up larger megawatt facilities. But sticking on OKLO here for a moment, again, the company is expected to SPAC. We do have actually a ticker here. I think it's Alt-C. ALCC is the SPAC. Let's see if that's, I believe that's already actually trading. Yeah, ALCC is the ticker. And then you'll see the Alt-C Acquisition Corp. It's trading for $10.44 right now. I have to say, I think, though, a lot of people are going to be once bitten, twice shy on this. Remember back in the day where everybody's like, oh, just buy a SPAC at $10. You can't go wrong buying a SPAC at $10. And yeah, no, you can. then what happens is they end up actually reverse merging. You get this merger, and then what? You get lockup expirations, and everybody on the inside dumps because the valuation for these companies is nutso. It's kind of remarkable. By the way, if you're on Twitter Spaces and you want to request to chat, feel free to request to chat, since now we are able to remind you about an expiring coupon code coming up in 2 weeks for the programs on Building Your Wealth, not just on YouTube or Twitch, but also Twitter Live video and Twitter Spaces, which I think is kind of cool. I still haven't looked to see if it's possible that both of those could possibly be going at the same time. I'm kind of like, the show must go on, so we're going to go with the show no matter what. But that does seem like it is kind of interesting. Yeah, it actually does look like I'm live on video and live with Spaces right now. How cool. Okay, so anyway, this gives us a little bit of a look into OKLO. Again, keep in mind, the biggest risks to a company like OKLO, in my opinion, are going to be energy. Well, I mean, number one, hands down by far, the biggest risk, hard stop, permitting. By far the biggest risk. Of course it's the biggest risk. Why? Because if nobody permits your project, you're not going to get off the ground. You're not going to be able to scale this. Your revenues are going to be nominal for a decade or more. And it's going to be a very risky investment, in my opinion. And look, even though I'm a licensed financial advisor and I run an ETF, can't give you personalized advice here on social media, but boy, I'm definitely a little little concerned about the revenue potential here, strictly from a permitting point of view. So that's permitting, but then you've got a big gap, and your next risk is just competition from other energy sources. Now, I do think that there is a real potential that solar and wind over this next decade this could end up becoming the decade of solar and wind. Right now, I believe markets are very anti-energy, very, very bearish energy, which I think is a perfect time to actually start creating positions in companies like Enphase. Let me give you a little hint. What you should do is go look at how many microinverters Enphase expects to manufacture by the end of 2024. This is something we've been talking about with course members for a while now. You should look at how many microinverters they're expected to manufacture by the end of 2024. And then you should look at how much money per kilowatt these inverters are expected to receive from the Inflation Reduction Act. And then when you do a little bit of quick math, you can start seeing that the net income numbers of Enphase could change dramatically more than Wall Street expects over the next 4 to 5 years. So pretty remarkable. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, Caleb here says, why not just IPO if you've had a good business for a decade? Right. So here's the way that works. A good business takes a lot of startup money, usually. Now, there are experimental good businesses, and then there are inherently good businesses. An inherently good business does not actually require that much startup capital because you start making money very quickly. Now, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back here, but I just don't think it's challenging what we're going to do. But with my real estate startup, knock on wood over here, with my real estate startup, I expect we could take a small amount of money relative to, the world of venture capital and actually start making money right away or very quickly, and then for about 10 years or 7 to 10 years make a lot of money and then IPO. So it'd be a very traditional path. Start with small seed, grow that, make money, prove profitability, and IPO. That's your traditional model. The problem is if you just have like some crazy idea that is either going to go to the moon or just completely collapse, like we're going to make solid state batteries or we're going to put nuclear power plants everywhere in people's neighborhoods, these ideas take hundreds to billions of dollars without any expectation of return until all of a sudden the pieces fall together and then the returns are insane. And so what people do, or why they SPAC, is they basically try to, I hate saying this phrase, but they kind of cheat the money raising process, because what they're doing is, rather than going through a traditional fundraise, which could take you like a year to put together, you basically just go to a blank company, that is a company that's IPO'd with a ticker like ALCC or whatever, Alt-C. And that company had basically a zero everything on their balance sheet. It's easy to audit. It's easy for the SEC to say, okay, yeah, go ahead and IPO. They IPO. They don't even ring the bell or anything. They just start trading on the stock exchange for $10, some form of par value. And then what happens is they say, who can we merge with? They come up with some crazy outlandish projections and story and narrative. And then they merge with that company, usually in the span of 3 to 6 months, with very limited SEC review. So really what you're doing is you're skipping a lot of the SEC review. You're skipping a lot of the underwriting that you would get from a traditional IPO, and you're skipping that traditional market testing that people like to see before a company actually goes public. So you're shortcutting all of this to try to make a bag of cash up front. And that's why I'm not the biggest fan of SPACs, because I kind of think they're just cash grabs, especially since the people who put their name on it, they end up taking these insane fees of like $50 to $100 million, 10 to 20% of the money raised. And that's just nuts. $100 million payday for doing a SPAC. I mean, don't get me wrong, it seems like a great business model, but I don't know. I guess we'll see. So, good luck to OKLO, but that's my take, I suppose. Now, I want you to know this. When it comes to AI, time is what's going to make you money. And if you can prove that value to an employer, you'll always be able to be employed. So this is another way of making sure that you don't get replaced by